So first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning to engage in the Rabbinical Assembly's international seminar for Halakhic study, which has been going on for several years, I think since 2018. Opportunities for the whole movement to really grapple with and struggle with an important pressing issue in Jewish law, and to get more of a sense for how Jewish law is made and how it is practiced in our movement. So I want to start. We're going to hang on one sec. My computer just did a weird thing where the all right, here we go. We're going to start with some opportunities to explore our own personal relationship to this aspect of Jewish tradition. But before we do, I wanted to give us a little bit of context. Now, the first thing is, it's significant that what we're looking at today is head covering, as opposed to some other mitzvah and looking at gender equality in that mitzvah. And here's why head covering is different. Head covering is different because in some ways it is a custom, not a mitzvah. And the fact of it being a custom changes how we think about it in terms of its context in Jewish law. Now, customs have a lot of weight and authority in Jewish law. In fact, there's a rabbinic dictum, a principle that minhag Yisrael dinhu, a custom of the Jewish people is like law, okay? And kippah wearing is one example of a case where, even though it starts out as a minhag, right, we treat it as a halachic ruling. But it's significant that we're not looking at, say, tefillin. The conservative movement, as of 2014, has been extremely clear that every mitzvah about which women were formerly exempted because of the idea of mitzvot aseh she'azman grama, of positive time-bound mitzvot that previously were associated more with men and not with women. The conservative movement since 2014, since accepting at a vote of 15-3, the tshuva of Pamela Barmash in 2014, in which she concludes the involvement of women in Jewish religious and liturgical life has changed significantly in the past century, and even more in the past few decades. Jewish women are aspiring to the privileges and responsibilities enjoyed by Jewish men throughout the millennia. The halakha has recognized when social customs change significantly, the new social reality requires a reappraisal of halachic practices. The historical circumstances in which women were exempted from time-bound positive mitzvot are no longer operative, and the conservative movement has for almost a century moved toward greater and greater inclusion of women in mitzvot. In Jewish thought and practice, the highest rank and esteem is for those who are required to fulfill mitzvot. We therefore rule that women and men are equally obligated to observe the mitzvot. We call upon conservative synagogues, schools, and camps to educate men and women in equal observance of the mitzvot and to accept and require their equal observance of mitzvot. And the final psak halakha, the ruling here is women and men are equally obligated to observe the mitzvot, with the exception of those mitzvot that are determined by sexual anatomy. In other words, right, the mitzvah of mikvah, okay, having to do with tarat mishpacha, with menstruation and family purity, that is determined by physical anatomy. That mitzvah is not incumbent upon men, right? And the mitzvah of Brit Milah, circumcision, right, which is tied to the anatomy, the physical body of folks born with a penis. Okay, that mitzvah is incumbent only on those folks and not on women. Okay, but with the exception of those two mitzvot, which are determined by sexual anatomy, the conservative movement makes no halakhic differentiation between men and women, right? So if we were looking at tefillin, we wouldn't have a discussion topic, because tefillin falls in the category of it's a mitzvah and it's equally obligated for men and women. If you are a man and you're coming to minyan, right, you should be wearing tefillin in the morning. And if you don't have a set, you should find a way to get a set. Ask your rabbi, see if there's money in the discretionary fund, get a set and learn to put on tefillin. You should be wearing tefillin at shacharit on weekdays. And if you're a woman, right, you are obligated in the mitzvah of tefillin, and you should be figuring out how to get yourself a set and learning how to put them on and coming to minyan and wearing tefillin. The conservative movement is clear, right? You are obligated, men and women, obligated in mitzvot equally, right? So, and that's since 2014, when this tshuva was accepted by the Conservative Movement's Committee of Jewish Law and Standards. Of course, as with any tshuva accepted by the CJLS, the Mara Da'atra of an individual community is the rabbi of a community is the halakhic decider for that community, right? So there might be communities that don't accept this tshuva as full halakhic authority, but in the conservative movement and in the community that I am the rabbi of, right, we accept this tshuva as the standard of Jewish practice and halakha for our community, right? That is to say, I believe that men and women are equally obligated in mitzvot. Now we look at head covering. Head covering, as I said at the very top, is not like tefillin, a mitzvah, like a mitzvah deoraita, a commanded practice that you say, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, right? Sanctifying the God who sanctifies us with the holiness of practicing mitzvot, right? Wearing a kippah is not like that. Wearing a head covering is not like that. And because kippah, in its sort of traditional sense of a crocheted or knitted or leather or satin, right? Kippah in its traditional sense has been associated for decades, for centuries with men, okay? And because of its status as a custom, there are women who feel like wearing that doesn't feel appropriate for their practice in Jewish in prayer, in Jewish tradition, right? And unlike tefillin, there isn't a clear teshuvah, like Pamela Barmesh's teshuvah, that says, yes, everybody should be wearing kippah. Now, that leaves us with some questions. It leaves us with questions of what is the right thing to do? What should communities expect of their congregants? What is it reasonable to require of people who have varying degrees of comfort? And are there different head covering practices that are equally acceptable, right? Does it have to be a kippah? Could it be some other way of covering your hair? Okay, and is head covering or hair covering the same thing? Okay, there's an association with hair covering that has to do with marriage, right? Is that a factor in this, right? Are we going to make a different rule for married people than for single people? And do we expect that there should be a rule that applies to everybody regardless of gender, or is there a gendered difference here? And I especially bring this up because I think it's relevant as we try to be more and more welcoming and friendly toward the queer LGBT community, right? What does it mean to acknowledge the fact that there are folks who do not fit into a gender binary of men on this side and women on this side? And how does kippah, right, play a role, or head covering in general play a role in feeling this sort of gender this performance of gender in our society? How does the performance aspect affect our understanding of this custom? So having now shared some of my sort of background on this issue, I also want to share my community's recent changes in practice, which is during last summer, the ritual committee discussed the practice of head covering in synagogue, and we decided to change from a practice of it's required for men and optional for women to a practice of it is an invitation for people of all genders to participate. Which means that if a man comes into our service, and we think in full knowledge of that policy, does not wear a head covering, we are not going to explicitly ask that person to cover their head differently from how we would any other person, any person of any gender, to cover their head. Which means, right, if you're coming up to the bima for an honor, we are going to ask you to cover your head, right? Because coming up to the bima is different from just being in our service, right? And that's true for men and women and people who are not in that gender binary. It also means, right, because we've decided to make this sort of invitational, that is my deep hope that all people who come to shul wear a kippah or another head covering during shul, right? It is an explicit hope and desire that everybody participate in this custom. And I just want to say one thing, which is the school board also discussed this matter and voted. And for our school, on Sunday mornings and Thursday afternoons, everybody up through the age of mitzvot, that is pre-K through 7th grade, is required to wear a kippah or other head covering in school, regardless of gender. And the reason why it's required there and invitational in our morning service on Shabbat is because we are trying to create a environment of exploration of the custom. And in an educational environment, if you make something optional, nobody will do it. So we wanted to make it required equally in that context, in the context of an educational opportunity, with the hopes that everybody, all the kids, develop a relationship with head covering as part of their Jewish practice, and then can make a choice in their bar mitzvah, post b'nai mitzvah life, whether they would like to continue that practice. In our high school, we do not have a rule about head covering. And I'll be honest with you that it is a little weird to me that when I teach my high school class, there are some people who do not, of both genders, who do not wear kippah. And there are some people who choose to wear a kippah. But obviously, our high schoolers did not have the opportunity that we're giving to our younger kids to really explore and grapple with what it means to wear this, to have this practice. So I've spoken a lot. I see that Rabbi Miriam Spitzer has something to say, I'm going to call on Rabbi Spitzer.
I just have a question. Is it okay to ask a question?
Go ahead.
You said you have a new policy that you are not requiring, you're not asking people for sure to put on a head covering. I want to know if you have yet, since you put that in, had a man come in and not with an uncovered head.
Once or twice. Once or twice. And we don't ask them to put a head covering on unless they are coming up for an honor to the bima. And the same is true, I think, with less consistency so far, that women who are not wearing a head covering are also asked to put one on when they come up to have an honor. I wish I could say that was 100%, but so far it isn't. But most of all the women who come to services have been wearing kippah, so it doesn't come up that often. Barbie, can you say more about what you posted in the chat?
I feel like I basically said everything. It just makes me very uncomfortable to not ask everybody to cover their heads, not just the men, but the women, everybody. It just doesn't feel right.
Right, and that did come up in our ritual committee meeting. Certainly,
I know, I was there, and I
know.
just...
Certainly, that is the policy that I would have hoped for. That is to say, I am comfortable with the idea of requiring head covering in some form for everybody. But the ritual committee was not comfortable with that. And we are about to study this teshuvah that I think shows some of the ambiguity, right? Unlike tefillin, which is a mitzvah, this practice is a custom. And I think that there is some ambiguity about whether it's fair to make a strict required ruling on things which are volitional, optional, customary. All right, I see Barbara has Barbara Navert has her hand up. Yeah.
Good morning, rabbis, Spitzers. First of all, we grew up in Scranton. Girls were not bat mitzvahed until my daughter was bat mitzvah. I don't remember what year it was, Mary, maybe you do. We were confirmed and we were up on the bima and we did wear yarmulkes, okay? Now flash forward, I don't remember what year it was, but we were asked to wear a yarmulke when we go up on the bima. And everybody who has an honor does respect that and puts a yarmulke on when they go on the bima. I, for one, don't like the idea that somebody is telling me what I can and what I cannot do in temple. I come to temple on Saturdays and I sit there and I do not wear a yarmulke. Some of the women do wear them. I'm one from old school that does not wear a yarmulke, does not put a talis on. But when I go up on the bima, I respect that and do wear a yarmulke. I don't want to be told what I have to do and what I don't have to do. I just don't find that the right thing to do.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Are you comfortable with a policy that tells Lewis what he can and can't do in the service?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the way the men were brought up a certain way.
Ah,
Yeah.
right. So for you, right, the fact that you were brought up with it's, optional for women, required for men, you're completely comfortable with making a gender differentiation. How does that make you feel with regard to somebody who says to you, well, I'm not a man or a woman. I don't fit in the gender binary. Where do I fit in your like old school version of the world?
You know what? That stuff is all new to me.
It's new to all
It's
of
all
us.
new.
Fair
And
enough.
pardon? Somebody
Yeah,
said
I
something.
think
Yeah.
I want it to be clear, right? What the position that you just had, which is
Yeah.
a position that is similar to many members on our ritual committee, which is part of why the ritual committee voted toward this policy of invitational for everybody rather than required for everybody, right? Is a position that is, I think, has some support in the precedent of Jewish tradition, right? I do want to distinguish though, Barbara. I'm not your rabbi, okay?
I know,
but
yeah.
If you were my congregant, I would tell you the decision to cover your head or not to cover your head, right, might be a matter of your personal practice. But the decision to wear a talit or not to wear a talit, right?
Yes.
The talit is a mitzvah.
Yeah, okay. You know what? I don't know, as chairman of the ritual committee sitting next to me, I don't know, and maybe Marion or Rhonda could, that would pass, that our congregation would follow that rule. I don't know that women have to have their head covered all the time. There are a handful that do, but most of them do not. Am I right, Marion or Rhonda?
Oh, you're right. Although I have found in services, I mean, definitely when women are called up to the bima, they do put on a kippah. But I find that women coming into services now, I find a slight increase in the number of women who will put it on to come into service and not just only when they're going up to the bima. I like options. I like the idea of being invited to. I like to learn more about it. I'd like to invite people to do things, but people have grown up with customs and they're hard to change. Now, people do like change and they do like to find out more, and they would like to perhaps take another step up in their ladder on their Jewish journey and do that. But I don't think it should be mandated in any way. Right. And then also we're dealing, I mean, without getting into the gender issue, we're dealing with a lot of intermarried in our congregation. And I find that could be, turn off is a word that's overused, but it could drive some people away who may not feel comfortable. Even though it's an invitation, they may not feel comfortable.
All right, Edith, you have to unmute.
I think I have a really different experience. I first walked into a service back, it was for High Holy Days. And I was about 5 years old, about 1945, 1946. Came into a conservative congregation. And as I was walking through the doors, the man at the door plunked a yarmulke on my head. No one walked into the sanctuary without a head covering. And that's the way I grew up. So some, different congregations have different policies, and I feel very uncomfortable in a service without my head covered. It's not always with a kippah. It's also been with a hat at certain times. But that was the norm, was that everyone had head covering.
Edith, my husband and I were in a synagogue in Florida on a Saturday morning, and we walked in and somebody literally threw a yarmulke on my head as I was walking into the sanctuary. I did not like that. But he said to me, this is the custom of our synagogue, that it was a conservative synagogue, that everybody has their head covered. So I wore it. I was a guest of the synagogue. I'm not going to get in trouble,
Sure. Barbie.
The issue of the intermarriage and the non-Jewish partner in the congregation, I don't see anything wrong with asking that non-Jewish partner to wear a head covering. I've been to mosques. We have a Sikh temple across the street from our shul. And when we attend, we are asked or offered something to cover our heads. It's in respect to that congregation. and their traditions. And I will just say, I grew up with wearing a hat. And when I became a bat mitzvah, somehow, and I was an adult, I was near 40 when I became a bat mitzvah with the formal celebration. I know I was bat mitzvah at the age of 13. I made the commitment to always cover my head when I'm in the synagogue, even if I'm not going into the sanctuary, because I never know if I'm going to go into the sanctuary. That's what men do, and I felt that equality. If women want equality, I think we should do what the norm is in that particular situation.
Great. So I
Amen.
love that you said that, Barbie, because I think that part of what underlies this question is whether, in fact, like what gender equity or gender equality means is everybody adopting the practice of the men, right? I am not sure that adopting the practice of men, right, and making everybody equal to the men is the most just practice in terms of gender equity. That is to say, look, I mean, in terms of what you said in terms of your desired practice, I'm right along with you. Okay, I would hope that people coming into a sacred space would cover their head, because to me, there's something very powerful about that, right? My daughter, who is 4.5, we have a rule with her, okay, that there are 3 activities, 3 actions that when she does them, she should be wearing a kippah to do them. And those 3 activities are eating, okay, praying, and studying Torah. All right, study. Okay, so those, when she does those things, she puts on her kippah. The rest of the time, she takes it off. She keeps one at her high chair, at her booster seat at our table, and she puts it on when she begins the meal. And when she's ready to leave the table and asks to be excused, she takes it off. And she wears it for coming into our service on Shabbat morning, because that's a prayer and study opportunity. And when she goes to religious school, she will wear a kippah during religious school, because that is study. And those are the 3 activities that we require her to wear a kippah during. But I do think that, right, I think, I think we should have a basket of kippot right by the entrance of the synagogue, so that when people walk in to the synagogue, they can choose to put one on, right, and not have to walk all the way to the sanctuary to find a kippah before walking around in the building. Like, I'm totally with you. Sacred space, wear a kippah. And requiring everybody to assume that the practice of men is the correct practice for everyone might not be the most accepting of difference and gender norms and gender, right? There are some people, like, take a trans woman who began life assigned at birth male pronouns, okay, grew up to a certain age as a man or as a boy, and makes a decision, conscious decision, to become a woman, okay? Part of that person's journey may have been taking off their kippah. Part of that person's journey may have been figuring out what it means to dress like a woman, and to require of all people male practice, as if male practice is the better practice, the normal practice, the highest level of practice, I think does a disservice to the possibility that there are different practices that are all acceptable in Jewish law.
But that's why we have I guess, are separate denominations, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, and the Ultra Frum, and so on. And I don't know. I find that and it's rare now that I go to our Reform temple, but I find more and more people are wearing a kippah.
Okay, I'd like to say something. My husband and I went to a service in Washington, D.C., and it was a Reformed temple. Now, the cantor wore a yarmulke. The rabbi did not. And it bothered me to this day. It bothered me that the rabbi did not. I kept saying to David, what, I don't understand this. I mean, coming from, I guess, Reformed, you got to expect that. You know, I guess if it was a conservative temple, I probably, would have been horrified, even more so. But I just found that really interesting at a Reformed temple that the rabbi did not wear a yarmulke. Now, as far as
was the rabbi a man or a woman?
a man. Oh, even if it was a woman, I respect a yarmulke. Being a rabbi, yes. But interesting. I mean, you brought up some different points there. Gender. I mean, I never really gave it much thought because I know when you go on the pulpit to have an honor, you wear the yarmulke, and I expect it. And if I see somebody on the pulpit that's not wearing a head covering, a woman, I get very annoyed. I would say somebody gets something for her to put it on her head, because that's the way I was brought up. And to have a kippah in the, yes, in the sanctuary, I think maybe. I mean, come to think of it, I mean, you're praying to God. I mean, I never really thought about it until this was brought up, to be honest with you. I never seriously thought about it. But I think that might be a good idea, coming into a sanctuary, to wear a yarmulke. We can ask, gently ask, do you mind putting this on? Whatever.
All right.
And we have different, and we don't have always the yarmulke, we have a head covering, that a woman can put on. That's not a big deal.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
I think that what you just said, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure about your name. I know your husband's name is
Rhonda. It's Rhonda.
Rhonda, I want to pick up on something that you just said, which is, sometimes we get so comfortable with the practices that we grew up with our local synagogue's tradition,
Right.
that it's very hard to imagine doing something different. And going to other places and seeing other customs, right? And engaging in this global seminar for Halakhic study is a real opportunity for women and men to examine their practice. I'll just say, as a man, right, it is, I should be asked, why do you wear a kippah? Why is it meaningful to you to wear a kippah, right? It shouldn't be obvious that that David, Lewis, Mike, and I, right, have to wear a kippah and not give it a second's thought about why we're doing it or why it's meaningful. And that if a woman is going to choose to wear a kippah, it must be that they are doing it because it's meaningful to them and they chose to have this practice, and right, and it's like a big deal, right? That it's something that they had to really, really think about. No, I mean, it should be like every mitzvah it should be like every Jewish spiritual practice, where like every person who chooses to do it should think about why it's meaningful to them to do it. And ultimately, that's why I was comfortable with the ritual committee's decision to make it invitational for everybody, as opposed to required for everybody, even though that would have been my preference, right? The invitational for everybody requires of everybody some thought, right? I never thought about this, Rhonda. Rhonda, you said, I never thought about this.
Yeah, correct.
And I think, right, like requiring both men and women, people of all genders, to think about why it's meaningful to them can only increase the connection that people have to this practice, even if it means that some men will think deeply about it and say, actually, this isn't meaningful to me, and choose not to do it, right? But at least there's some thought that went into that. So the section of our program that we've been doing is the part that's called part 1, your textual tradition. That is to say, the textual tradition that is our lived practice. In Jewish thought, there in Halakhic decision making, one of the categories that Halakhic thinkers have to connect to in order to make a decision is, what will the community bear? What can this community handle? Can this community handle a decision that might turn people off? The aspect of what is the practice of the people, right? There's an Aramaic term that talks about the practice of the people. What is the practice of the community? That is a part of Jewish legal thinking. So that's when it says your textual tradition here at part 1, your textual tradition is what we've been discussing. The things that we've done growing up, the practices of our community, the discussions that we have in ritual committee, the feeling that we have when we engage with certain practices. Before we move on to looking at some of these traditional sources, I wanted to make sure to ask if anybody has any questions that you're hoping will be answered by this study. And I'm going to ask everybody to take 2 minutes to think. And then if you have any questions, to please write them in the chat. And if you're on a phone and it's really difficult to write them in the chat, I'll give also a moment for people to say their question out loud, but I would at the end. But I'd prefer first, nobody put anything in the chat until I say go, but people should be thinking of questions and then writing them. And when I say go, we can all hit enter and put them into the chat. All right.
And we'll see it better, Rafi, if you put us back in without the screen share.
Okay, sure. So everybody should think, and if there are any questions that you're hoping to learn over the next 45 minutes to an hour to an hour or so, please put them in the chat. All right. Let anybody who has a question, please do press enter and share it with the group.
I'm trying to figure out how to do it.
If you go down to the bottom of the screen where it says chat.
No, you're in the wrong spot. Lou, go on the bottom.
Like it should say security, participants, chat. It might not say security because you're not the host, but it should say participants and chat. So if you press on where it says chat,
Oh, it's up there.
then you can write.
There we go. We got it.
You should write them to
Got a couple of
everyone.
old people. Got a couple of old people here.
Yeah, totally good. All right, I see that that Edith has put a question in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to hope that we engage with?
questions.
I'm just gonna give it 2 more minutes for anybody to put down questions that they have, and then while you're putting down questions, gonna share how the next bit of this gonna go. Rabbi Miriam Spitzer and I had talked about splitting into small groups or chavrutot to do the next section of study and then coming back together. But I feel like we have a small enough group that we can do the study together. We are not going to study the source sheet which we sent out, and which I'm also putting a link to in the chat right now. So if you would prefer to open it up on your own device so that you can see it, or if you have a printer to open it up and print it, you can do that. What we're going to do is the next section is called Part 2, Traditional Sources. We're going to look at many, but not all of these sources. And we're going to discuss some of the questions that are brought up, okay, by these sources. That's what we're going to do for the next bit of our program, 20 minutes, half an hour, right? We're going to really engage with these sources. In the middle of this, of these sources, we're going to transition, right? I'm going to start us off on our study and make a couple of comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Miriam Spitzer, who is going to close out our study of these sources and make another couple of comments. And then Rabbi Miriam Spitzer is going to lead us in a study of the teshuvah in question itself. We will read some sections of that teshuvah together with Rabbi Spitzer the Elder, and then and over the course of that conversation, hopefully we'll get to a bunch of the questions that were asked, and so that's so that you know where we're going. That's the next aspect of our program. Before we start looking at the sources, some people put stuff in the chat. I also said that if you had a hard time putting questions in the chat, that you might consider just saying your question out loud. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to say out loud?
Any questions?
I'll put it in the chat.
Oh.
Okay. And does anyone have any reflections, reactions, or comments about our program up to this point before we go on?
Marion, was that a hand?
All right. All right, so we're going to jump into some of these traditional sources about head covering. We're going to start with text number 5. So if you have it printed out or you have it on another screen, you can engage with it that way. But I'm also sharing my screen so that you can engage with it here. So would somebody like to read in English text number 5?
Said Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, a person is forbidden to walk for almost in an upright posture. What does that mean? Amod.
Yeah.
Oh, walk for Amod in an upright posture. It says, the earth is full of his glory. Rabbi Huna, the son of Rab Yehoshua, would not walk 4 cubits with an uncovered head. He said, the Shekhinah is above my head.
All right. So this is one of the primary sources primary original sources for the custom of head covering. And you'll note, right, that that gender isn't a huge factor here. Okay, it's not that gender isn't present. The word that means person here is Adam, which is often a male-bodied person, but right, Ben Adam in rabbinic teaching just means human being. It's sort of the same way where son of man doesn't necessarily mean a man. Son of man means a human. Okay, even though there's some gendered language there. So I do think it's a fair translation to say a person. Okay, and a person is forbidden to walk 4 amot, that's 6 feet. Okay, fully upright. Okay, and amma is about a cubit is about 18 inches. And so 4 cubits is 6 feet. Full upright posture, meaning with a straight back, head up, like proud, right? Haughty, right? The idea here is God is above you, have some humility. Okay, and Rav Huna says that the way that he shows his own personal humility is by covering his head. By covering his head, he doesn't have to walk with a hunched back. He doesn't have to worry about whether his back is straight or whether he's walking in a full upright posture. By covering his head, it's as if he's saying, I'm not fully upright, right? And so he's able to walk around, at least this is how I read the text, he's able to walk around without worrying about whether he's fully upright, because the kippah reminds him or protects him or shows that God is above him. That kippah gives him enough humility that he doesn't have to walk around hunched. Does anyone have any reactions or thoughts or a different interpretation of that text? Louis, did you have something you wanted to say?
I never heard of that reason for wearing the kippah before. I always thought it was just because of respect. Like you wouldn't come before God without your head covered anymore. You go before the president without a shirt. It was just a matter of being respectful.
All right. So the one of the earliest sources that we have for the custom of wearing a kippah doesn't have to do with respect as much as it has to do with humility. But I do think that humility is an aspect of respect, right? That is to say,
Yes.
I don't think these are mutually exclusive. I think that your interpretation of, it's just the garb for an audience with God, right? That's a fair interpretation. Yeah, Rabbi Miriam Spitzer.
Yeah, I have something to add to this. The way you just explained it as being about humility is always the way that I've understood this text also. But I want to point out that Rabbi Kanarek, am I saying her name right?
Kanarek.
What?
Kanarek.
Rabbi Kanarek, who wrote the tshuva, explains it differently in her explanation of the tshuva. She says that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi forbids walking in an upright posture lest one physically encounter God's kavod. That is that God's presence hangs down, so to speak. And if you walk upright, you're going to hit it. And you can't do that without the barrier of the kippah on your head, which I think is a different approach to understanding Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi here.
Great. So maybe it's not about humility, it's about danger. The intimate contact with the divine can be dangerous. And the kippah is like a shield. It's like contraceptive. It's a protection. It's a protective, a garment of protection against an unkind interaction with the divine, right? You're not going to get a lightning bolt shot down on you when you're wearing a kippah, right? God's physical presence can cause harm, danger, death. And so we should wear these, prophylactic, that's the word I was looking for. We should wear a prophylactic against against a negative encounter with the divine. Mishka, yeah, sorry.
It strikes me as interesting that it's both the prophylactic, as you say, from the idea that something bad could happen to you, and something bad could happen to you in an interaction with God. Why is this head covering something that's actually going to protect us? I don't know, and I certainly don't know its origin. But the other point that I wanted to make is the earth is full of his glory. This is what Rabbi Yehoshua says. He's saying that God is everywhere. Not, those four amot are not keeping God from somewhere in your it's not that God isn't there for those four amot.
Right. So I think the four amot here is walking, like moving from one place.
It's a transitional thing.
Right. That's exactly it.
Doesn't mean that God isn't with you during that transition.
No, right. I think the in rabbinic tradition, 4 amot is like the minimum distance that is considered a distance. Like closer than 4 amot is still like you haven't moved. Okay, you have to move farther than 4 amot to have actually moved somewhere. So it's like if you're going to move from the place where you're currently at, a distance that counts, that qualifies as movement, you should do so in the acknowledgement that God is present.
But the image that I have with this particular thing is somebody getting out of bed and taking the 4 amot to do whatever they're doing when they wake up. It strikes me as really contradicting the idea that God is with you all the time. That, yes, you're getting up to go to the bathroom, but God is still with you.
Yeah, I don't see that in this text at all. Like I'm not sure.
The earth is full of his glory is what makes me think that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think the text agrees with you. I think the text agrees with you. I think Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying, because the earth is full of God's glory, anytime you move, God is with you. And when you're present where you are, God is with you.
Yes.
The 4 amot is just the minimum distance to feel like you've moved from one place to another. But God is with you if you don't move, and God is with you if you do move.
Right.
I think that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying. All right, I'm going to share one more text and then turn it over to Rabbi Miriam Spitzer. And Rabbi Miriam Spitzer will be able to go back, right? Just because I went to text 10, I wanted to do text 5 and text 10, but there are a lot of texts. We'll get to other ones. Text 10, would somebody like to read it? Barbie?
A person should not stand as to recite the Amidah with his money bag and uncovered head or bare feet if the manner of the people of the place is only to stand before important people wearing shoes. All
right, great. So we're not going to get in so much to this question of the bare feet, but let's focus on the first two. Although the bare feet is also interesting, and we could talk about that too. But a person should not stand to recite the Amidah. Okay, so now we're not just, the text 5 was anytime you're moving anywhere. It wasn't in a religious context. Like Mishka said, this reminds me of getting up out of bed in the morning and going to the bathroom or brushing your teeth, right? This is walking to the next room of your house, right? There's nothing particularly religiously significant about that. Okay, but text 10 puts us in the context specifically of a religious posture, right? That is to say, when you're doing the Amidah, when you're praying to God, okay, when you're saying these words, which is a religious gesture, there are activities that you should not be doing at the same time, okay? And there are 3 that are mentioned right? What are the three? Having your wallet out, okay? Having an uncovered head, and having bare feet. So, and he qualifies the bare feet, right? He says, but if you live in a place where you would go to visit the queen wearing bare feet, then you can completely wear bare feet when you pray, right? That it's completely socially dependent. That is to say,
If his money bag is out, it just says with his money bag. It doesn't say out.
right. So with his money bag, meaning your wallet, right? Your money bag is your
Yes,
wallet. So
yes.
right. So I would contend that if your wallet is in your pocket, okay,
Right,
that is not what this is talking about,
okay,
right? I would contend that, right, having your money bag, your purse, like on the chair next to you, is not what this is talking about. This is
Okay.
talking about you're in the middle of the Amidah, and you know that it's your practice to give tzedakah as part of your shacharit service, and while you're praying, you're reaching into your wallet and you're looking for a one so that you can give tzedakah right after. You shouldn't
okay,
do that, right? Or you're reading through the Amidah and you get to the point that talks about everybody is gonna gather in Israel, someday, the kibbutz galiot, the bracha about kibbutz galiot, and it reminds you that somebody you're davening next to is going to Israel next week, and you want to give them $1 so that they should have a nisiat tova, a good journey, right? And while you're davening the Amidah, your mind wanders a little bit, and you're like, oh, I need to give them $1 so that they'll have a good journey. And you reach into your pocket for your wallet. This is saying, no, it is completely inappropriate to be thinking even about tzedakah, but certainly about commerce or paying someone back, or, oh yeah, I should check my Discover card number so that I can type in. I'm gonna make my Amazon order while I'm davening. Right? Clearly, that is an inappropriate posture for prayer. Right? So my question to all of you is, what is the relationship between commerce, right, between the money bag question and having an uncovered head? Like, how are these things related?
go ahead.
Well, again, it's not something you would do, because if you were standing in front of an important person, the governor called you into his office, you wouldn't be there fiddling with your wallet. You wouldn't go in with an old T-shirt on. You'd be properly dressed, probably a jacket and a shirt and a tie and so forth. You would dress it properly, and you wouldn't do anything to try. You wouldn't get your phone and be fiddling with it while you're standing in front of an important person. So it's just a matter of respect. So in the same way, you should act in that kind of posture or manner of dress before the Holy One.
Great. Does anyone have anything to add to what Louis just said? Tyson, you have to unmute.
For the Amidah, you are having an audience with God.
Yes. Okay.
Right. Similar to this idea of having an audience with the governor. And so that's different, right? There are appropriate places to pull out your wallet and inappropriate places to pull out your wallet or to fiddle with your phone, right? And so too, perhaps we could say there are appropriate places to have your head uncovered and appropriate places to not have your head uncovered. And right, so it's clearly not saying that you have to never take out your money bag, right? That's not practical at all. When you go to the store, you take out your money bag, right? Like, what might be the places where you could stand uncovered with your head uncovered? And like, this is significantly different, I think, from the idea that God is everywhere and you can't even walk four paces without your head covered, right? This is saying, no, there's room for walking around with your head uncovered, as long as when you're in your audience with God, you have your head covered. As long as when you have your audience with God, you have your head covered. So this text 10, is from the Shulchan Aruch. It's Yosef Karo, okay, and Karo is using masculine language, right? When it says a person here, it says lo ya'amod. That's the third person masculine form, okay? Would it be fair to say a man should not stand with his money bag, uncovered head or bare feet? Or do you think that these things, commerce, respect, like appropriate dress, wearing shoes, like that applies to everyone, right? Like that is to say, if a woman was going to see the governor or the mayor or whatever, a woman also shouldn't fiddle with their purse or their wallet, or pull out their phone, or show up without wearing the right kind of shoes, right? That is to say, like maybe this, even though it's in masculine language, like it applies to everyone. What do you think?
Well, it wasn't long ago that we thought of man or a he or a she, the chair. It was the chairman, rather than a chairperson. Until quite recently, it was used as a generic for person.
Yeah, great. I think that there's something to that, right? When Karo says lo yamod, he just means a person shouldn't, and it's anyone. I definitely think there's something to that, right? Also, the examples here don't feel particularly gendered to me, right?
Mhm.
Wearing shoes, carrying a purse, those are things that everybody does. So also the head covering feels like something that it could be that everybody does. Like when you go into a courtroom, some people are wearing hats, some people are not wearing hats, but there's an understanding that when the judge comes in, right, you take off your hat, rise, stand. Like when you're singing the national anthem, you take off your hat, right? Unless you're in uniform, right? There's like a way of being that doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. This is just the dress code of this moment. Yeah, Mishka.
I'm reminded of a story that Rabbi Arthur Waskow spoke when he was one of the people on trial in Chicago in 1968 after the Chicago riots regarding the Democratic National Convention, and he was testifying in front of Judge Hoffman wearing a kippah. And Judge Hoffman, a nice Jewish boy, said, "You have to take off your hat. You have to take off your kippah." And Reb Arthur refused to do so and was escorted away because it was not the minhag of the court for somebody to keep their hat on. But I certainly see that even though I think of Rabbi Karo as being an extremely conservative soul, that he did mean both men and women need to be appropriately attired when they were in a particular place where, when in Rome, do like the Romans.
Great. All right, I'm now going to turn it over to Rabbi Miriam Spitzer to continue with our study of these texts. I know that she has a couple of different ones that she wants to look at with us and continue the discussion. Thank you all so much for your participation up to this point. It's not that I won't, say anything. I'm sure I won't be able to help myself, but I have completed my section of this program.
Okay, and you are certainly welcome to add things. I'm going to share the screen now. Give me a second. Here it is. Okay. I'd like to go and Rabbi Spitzer, you are certainly welcome to add at any point. I'd like to look at number 9, which is the one above the one that we were just reading. This is also Rabbi Yosef Karo. And this one says, all count for the 7 people who can have aliyot, all count to read from the Torah on Shabbat. People who can read Torah, even a woman and even a minor who's old enough to understand for whom one blesses. Minor, an old enough child who understands what aliyot are about. So all can count, even women can count for aliyot. And then Cairo puts a gloss on that and says, but the sages said a woman should not publicly read from the Torah because of kavod hasibur, the honor of the congregation. And then Rav Moshe Isserles adds to that, and it's forbidden to read from the Torah with an uncovered head. So if we compare this to number 10, what we have here, the question that we ended with when we looked at number 10, who is being spoken about here? Is this being spoken about a man or a woman or just anybody? Arguably, the argument was made that it could be just anybody, and that may be right. But it also is possible that Rav Yosef Karo understands the difference between different communities and what is considered reasonable in different communities and in different circumstances. And in other words, we may not like how the sages say that a woman should not publicly read from the Torah because it's against the honor of the congregation, but it gives us an understanding that the honor of the congregation is something that varies from place to place. And likewise here, the idea of an honor of the congregation and what's reasonable might vary from place to place, just like bare feet is something that varies. For instance, if you live in a Muslim community where Muslims definitively pray with uncovered feet, if they don't pray, if it's considered uncouth and improper to go into a Muslim prayer area with shoes on. So we're seeing here a difference in understanding of what means honor and what's proper, and that gives us some space to say, what does that mean in our communities and in our congregations, where we would not say even a woman can read Torah, but it's not honorable for the congregation. We would say it's very honorable for the congregation, for men and women and non-binary people to read Torah. Any comments on that? Tyson?
So does that go to what the congregation can tolerate?
And right, although I'm going to speak, I'm going to have other things to say about that a little later because I have mixed feelings about that. But yes, I think I think that we have it in our sources to ask that question. What does honor of the community and what can the congregation tolerate is not a modern question, or it's not only a modern question. Our answers might be different. Okay. So the next one that I want to look at is number 11. Okay, somebody want to read this one? This, who was it that asked about a non-Jewish person in shul? Louis, you want to read this one?
Well, okay.
And it appears to me that there is a strict prohibition concerning uncovering one's head for another reason, and that is because now it is now a law among the Gentiles that as soon as they sit down, they always remove their hats. And if so, this is inclined in the rule and do not follow their laws. Leviticus 18:3. All the more so in this rule, which has a reason, because covering one's head teaches about the fear of heaven, as in a passage at the end of the tractate Shabbat.
Okay,
I was asking about a Gentile who's your guest in the synagogue and
Right.
be respectful.
this
It
is
the-
the flip. This is the flip. So what the Taz is saying here, from the, probably from the 1600s, what the Taz is saying is that one of the reasons that we cover our heads is because the non-Jews don't cover their heads.
Okay.
We want to be different from what the non-Jews do. Once I was invited to give I was at one of those interfaith, it was, I think, Veterans Day. And I was at a mixed program, and I was asked to give a prayer, and they invited the rabbi up to give the prayer. And right before they turned it over to me, they said, okay, everybody, hats off. It was a military thing, and it's time for a prayer. It was hats off. One of my congregants who was in the audience said to me later that you should have seen my face when he said that. The expectation, but the idea that Jewish practices sometimes conform to what the people around us are doing, and sometimes are developed, at least according to this source, exactly the opposite. It's developed in distinction to what's going on around us.
Yes.
So anybody have anything to add about this source or anything that you see in this source?
Rabbi, our son-in-law, who you know, when he comes into this temple, he has a special yarmulke that was given to him by our nephew, who was a Reconstructionist rabbi, and he puts it on his head. Soon as he walks in the door, he puts on his yarmulke out of respect. I know of another couple that was in a new marriage who a congregant came to him and went like, here. And this young man was so put out by the way he was told he had to wear a yarmulke that he left. You know, like they weren't nice about it. So you have to be nice about it. You have to be polite. You have to say, you know, please, would you please put a yarmulke on? You know, you're in the main sanctuary, and show it out of respect. It's the way you do it. It's the
We
way
could also ask the reverse. If we go into a church and they say it's the custom in the church to be bareheaded, and we say, wait a minute, we can't walk 4 amot without a head covering, what do we do?
But I don't think Christians these days look upon a small yarmulke that they would if you're wearing a hat. That they understand the difference.
Barbie?
I was going to say, I often go into churches either for a funeral or any kind of a service. And from my personal feelings, I'm in a house of God and I wear my yarmulke.
You should, yes.
Do you wear your yarmulke all the time, or just?
I would like to, or wear some sort of a head covering, because yeah, God is all around, all over, not just in the synagogue.
Sure, yes.
For some reason, I'm not quite ready for that. Sometimes the hats that I've looked at look too orthodox. I am not orthodox. I don't pretend to be.
Right.
I like to consider myself a respectful person. Many times I've gone to Minyan when we had Minyan in person, and you know, daily Minyan or something, and then I would go to the market afterwards and I'd have my yarmulke on.
You forget to take it off, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
On the comment of the difference between a hat and a yarmulke, that actually happened to me. I was actually in a church in Rome on a hot summer's day, and I was wearing a hat. And they told me, take off your hat. And I said, I'm Jewish. And they said, then wear a yarmulke. So I took off my hat and my yarmulke was underneath it and it was all fine. It was all fine. It was there. It was not a problem. But that actually happened in those many words to me once. But there may be churches who might even ask people to take even off a yarmulke out of respect in their places. And then there's a dilemma. And it's a similar dilemma to what Lewis is talking about.
I would do that if I was asked. But no one has yet asked me to remove my yarmulke when I'm in a church.
Well, that's also possibly a difference between a man and a woman. The custom in churches for men and for women are in churches that are strict about this. It's men that have uncovered heads, and women in many churches wear hats. It's again a custom of the place. But I think it's true that in most places you're not going to be asked to take off a yarmulke in a church. I just don't think it's impossible that it'll happen. All right, so this one I think is for me. Looking at all, can you still? I'm no longer seeing people. Are you seeing?
We're seeing you.
You're seeing me. Are you seeing the source that I just shared?
Nope.
No.
Oh, okay. So I did it. 1 second. I did it wrong. Let me do it again. Here we go. Okay. Now that's why I didn't see you. Okay. Here we go. So this final source, this one from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, I think to me was the most surprising and in some ways the most fascinating. Just a little background. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef lived from 1920 to 2013. And he was the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel for a long time. He had a long tenure, and he was phenomenally interesting in his tshuvot. He had some political challenges from my perspective that we won't get into here. But the way that he wrote tshuvot and his method of teaching was very interesting, and he would bring in every single source that he could think of, and would quote. His tshuvot tend to be really long because he brings in many. He doesn't bring in representative sources. He brings in every source. But this is really interesting. What he says. He says that in any case, it appears that it's fitting to teach single girls to cover their heads when they recite blessings, and all the more so when they pray the Shemona Esrei. This is Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, chief rabbi of Orthodox Sephardic rabbi, who says that women and girls should be covering their heads even when they say blessings, and all the more so when they pray the Shemona Esrei, and goes on to say, well, now the reason that single girls is interesting is because he's already assuming that married women have their heads covered.
Yeah.
So married women already have their heads covered, so he doesn't have to make a ruling. He's not specifically talking about married women. He's including married women in single girls because married women already have their heads covered. So married women have their hair covered, and single girls should cover their heads. And then he quotes another rabbi who says when they bless or pray or when they read Tanakh or utter God's name, when they read Tanakh, that's back to study Torah. When they utter God's name, when they're talking about God or when they're saying any kind of blessings. And so here he's saying that women and girls should be covering their heads, similar to the way that Rabbi Spitzer explained that he's teaching his daughter. He's teaching his daughter according to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef to cover her head when she eats, which includes blessings, when she davens, and when she studies. And he goes on to say this was the custom in Eastern lands. So I read this and I thought that was amazing. And he goes on to say it's a holy obligation upon the heads and directors of Beis Yaakov schools to stand at guard and teach the students of the schools. Beis Yaakov schools are girls' schools, very religious girls' schools. Holy obligation to teach the students, the girls, to cover their heads when they pray and they bless and they read from the Torah, or at least when they pray, and that is really important. So I confess that I didn't expect to see that from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and that's not it's not the practice in those communities. Whatever he says here, it's definitely not the practice in those communities, which he also talks about in another place. But I want to bring to your attention that he says this, and that I find this amazing. And any comments from on this from anybody else?
I do think this is amazing. How is it received by the community?
Well, there's another line in it that says, but it's not really the practice where we do it, so we're not going to push so hard on it.
Isn't that Jewish? But
Push back.
on the other hand,
Well, the intonation was mine, not his. But yes, I would like to know how the communities that follow Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and follow his rulings so strictly, how they choose to ignore this one. But even if they do, I think it's fascinating that he says it, and that he says the right way to be is for girls to cover their heads at very least at those times when they're engaged in holy activities, those holy activities. And how that impacts on us.
I just want to say that in the Sephardi community in Israel, of which Ovadia Yosef was the chief rabbi for many, many decades, it is also not uncommon for men to only put on their kippah when doing those activities. That is to say, that it is fairly common in Israel to have a Mizrahi or Sephardi man who keeps kosher and keeps Shabbat and religiously practicing, but who goes on the street without a kippah on, but has it in his pocket and puts it on for certain activities. And I would say that in Ovadia Yosef's community, the most head-covered population is married women who don't go out of the house without their hair covered. Whereas for men, there's a little bit more opportunity for option. And he's saying unmarried women should have the same responsibility to cover their head for certain moments as men of all ages and marital statuses do.
Which is fascinating. But we have to admit that it's observed in the breach. They don't do it. But it's fascinating that he says it, and that's a helpful it's a helpful comment. We're going to go back to fairly soon talking about the question of whether what men do is the standard and women should conform to that. In Israel, we see that sometimes what Ashkenazim do becomes the standard, Ashkenormative, and Sephardim sometimes end up blending into that. It'll be interesting to see if this is an example, not the women, but what Rabbi Spitzer is talking about, the men, Is that going to stick, or is it going to become ashka normative that all that quote unquote religious men cover their heads all the time? But I'm glad you brought that up, because I hadn't thought of that in this context, and that's very helpful. All right, any other comments before we go on to the tshuva itself?
I guess I'm curious to know if there's anything that people were really surprised about in the text that we studied.
You're talking about Ovadia Yosef?
Any of the text?
Any of the
Oh.
texts. Like, were you surprised about the motivation for wearing kippah? Were you surprised that there's an Orthodox rabbi who says that women should be wearing them? Were you surprised? Like, did anything that we looked at so far make you think differently about this practice?
It doesn't make me feel differently about the practice, but that these folk are encouraging it, or at least not discouraging it.
Tyson?
The first one that we did, for me, gave me a new way to think about my own practice. Because like the author of this shuva, for a long time, I was ambivalent about wearing a kippah publicly. And I tended to wear it when I thought I really needed to remember what mattered and what was important. And I've since resolved that. And now I wear it for many reasons, but a predominant one is to keep me remembering, if I remember that it's on my head, what matters. And I think that it gave me a new way of thinking about what matters. Is that another way of saying that is that God is everywhere.
So Tyson, you find the idea that God's glory encompasses the world, God is everywhere, so we wear a kippah all the time, more compelling than the idea that we should keep it in our pocket and put it on when we bless, when we eat, when we pray, when we study.
Yes. And it took me a long time to resolve my ambivalence about that.
I'd like to give a minute for reactions to that. Mishka?
I'm really struck by what she said, because it really touches me with the ambivalence that I've been feeling over many, many years. I kind of joke that I won't wear a hat until it's 20 below. I don't like to put anything on my head. But when you're saying that it reminds you of what matters, that really strikes me as very important.
That has a lot to do with how I resolved my ambivalence, because it seems that for me, at least at this particular time, staying in touch with what really matters is crucial.
Mm-hmm. It certainly gives me the impetus to try it.
And I live in a community that is not predominantly Jewish, and it's not unusual for somebody to say something to me like, "Oh, that's such a cute hat."
Hmm.
And I say, "Thank you."
Mm-hmm. Does it keep people from saying Merry Christmas?
No, it does not.
I've had people say Merry Christmas and then look at me and apologize.
Mm-hmm.
That has
Some
happened.
people say Happy Holidays, which I hate.
Yeah, right.
Fine if people wish me a Merry Christmas. I like when they wish me a Merry Christmas. That's
Yeah,
I would
I
rather-
take it in the spirit that it's
Yeah.
intended.
Yeah,
That's what I
say
tell them.
thank you.
When
and
somebody
wish them a Merry-
apologizes, I say, I took it in the spirit that it was intended.
Yeah, I do.
There you go.
I would much prefer that to Happy Holidays.
Rabbi, I have an Orthodox brother. that wears his yarmulke all the time. I have my oldest brother who is conservative and wears a yarmulke all the time. Lives in New Jersey. He drives his car. He has to drive his car to synagogue. That yarmulke is on his head. He wears it all the time. He feels that that's part of him. That's who he is, and he's going to wear it all the time. I don't argue with him. I just,
No.
that's him, you know? And so he's driving on Saturday. He has his yarmulke on.
Conceptually, the one thing that I haven't confronted yet, but that I wonder about is there are places like Jerusalem where, or like parts of New York, where you invite some level of danger to be wearing a kippah, or in Europe. I mean,
Yeah, like most of Europe.
yeah, right.
Yeah, we can build on that. We can build on that a little bit as we go along. And where danger where danger affects decisions on this. All right, I'm gonna move into looking at the tshuva. And I want to start at the beginning. The question that's asked is, should women and girls wear a head covering during prayer? So the question is specifically talking about during prayer, and if so, when and where. And I want to start with this. In the contemporary Jewish world, male head covering is understood as a visible symbol of piety and as a sign of Jewish identification. Originating as a custom, male head covering has become normative practice in synagogues and minyanim in much of the Jewish world. This is certainly true of the conservative movement. However, head covering practices for women and girls in conservative synagogues and minyanim vary. Some females do not wear any head covering, others wear a kippah, others a hat, still others a scarf or a headband. Here, this line down here, for some women, a decision about head covering rests on the following calculus. Head covering, while not obligatory for males, has long been understood as a strong Jewish custom as to have been as strong a Jewish custom as to become obligatory. So that is how she opens, and that is what we've been talking about here. And that brings us back to the question that she's going to deal with over and over in her tshuva that we started with. And I have two questions here. One is the question of, is what men do, should that be the standard? And two is the question of the way I was brought up. So we've touched on both of those. Before I give some thoughts on them, I want to give one more chance to anybody to say anything that wasn't said yet on those two things. Oh, Barbie?
Hevia comes to mind. Tradition. What we're so used to. I don't know.
What we're so used to. Okay, so I'm going to make some reflections on this as we study the tshuva. Rabbi Spitzer said at the beginning that perhaps we shouldn't have what men do be the standard and everybody else have to measure up to what men do. And I would like to flip that on its head a little bit and look at it a little differently. What if the question is not, what do men do? But the question is, what do prayer leaders do? What do people who come up for aliyot do? What do people who study Torah do? And if we find that in in some communities or in some eras, the people who do those things were predominantly men. Maybe we're not asking what do men do, but we're asking what's done during those things. And if women weren't doing those things, then we're not looking at what women did when they were doing those things. We're looking at what was done when those things were done. And head coverings were worn when services were led, when people walked into the sanctuary, when prayers were said, when Torah was studied, and perhaps at other times as well, again, with a distinct difference between different places, what happened in Poland and what happened in Morocco. And what happened in Germany might be something in between. But perhaps saying men are the normative is looking at it wrong. I want to allow for some reactions to that. Barbie?
I think you bring up a very valid point about the fact that what does the prayer leader do? And for a gazillion years, a woman never read from the Torah, never went up on the bima for an aliyah. So it was expected that that's what it would be. But now that women do these things, I think it's, I don't know. I just lost it.
Rabbi Spitzer, are you saying that our standard of like general practice should be like what prayer leaders do, like the predominant practice of prayer leaders throughout history? That is, are you saying because prayer leaders throughout history wore a kippah, prayer leaders now, regardless of gender, should wear a kippah? Or are you saying because prayer leaders and Torah studiers wore a kippah throughout history, people of all genders should wear a kippah all the time?
So I'm starting with the first. I'm starting with the first and haven't yet gotten to all the time.
But you could make
Starting
an
with-
argument because the category of people who were prayer leaders often wore kippahs even when they weren't leading prayers. So too, nowadays that there's a broader category of people that fit into the possibility of being prayer leaders, that they also, when they're not leading prayers, should also wear kippah all the time.
What do you guys think of that argument?
Well, you can still accept what you're talking about, Rabbi Miriam Spitzer, is activities, tying the custom to activities as opposed to who is doing the activity. And I think you can extend that to the activity of walking around in the world.
Louis, do you have a reaction to that?
I find it interesting that there are people who always expect a rabbi to wear a kippah, but yet would only wear it themselves if they're in the synagogue. And there seems to be a dichotomy there. The kippah almost becomes like a costume.
That's Rabbi Sachs.
Yeah, it should be the
Yeah.
costume that somebody wears, they're doing a certain activity, or if they're a certain person, a certain official.
Yeah.
Instead of the original intent.
I like uniform rather than costume, but I completely hear that, right? That there are certain activities in the world that require certain mode of dress. Now, you can call that a costume or you can call it a uniform. How you refer to it, right, creates a completely different association.
Yes.
Also, there's a rabbinic statement, toch shelo lishma ba lishma. You do something for one reason, and as you do it, it grows into a different reason. And that's often brought up as a way to educate. You do it because you have to, but eventually it becomes part of you. And I think that's similar to what Tyson was saying about her practice. She started in certain things, and as she did it, it grew to be more and more important and more part of her basic everyday dress. And maybe many of us can say that in different ways and for different reasons. It started as the uniform because I was a rabbi, and then it became the uniform because I'm a Jew.
Right,
Okay.
right. I like that. If a rabbi should wear a yarmulke.
Well, I actually had a friend, a Jewishly educated friend who, when I was going through my ambivalent stage, who said, Rabbi, why are you wearing a kippah? The rabbis wear kippot. And I think it was in reference actually to the women that we knew who are rabbis.
A fascinating question. Jew on the street, why are you wearing a kippah? You're not a rabbi.
Yeah.
A fascinating question. Marion, did you have a hand up before? You're muted.
I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think these are fascinating, fascinating comments. I would like to make a comment on the way I was brought up argument. When I was a kid, it was when there were women, it was the very beginning of when women were starting to wear kippot or tefillin or talis, and there were very few, and it was very new. And the argument was given, well, first a personal story. I myself, when I was in 7th grade or 6th grade, decided that I was going to have my head covered. I believe that every Jew should have head covering, and I was going to cover my head. I went to an Orthodox school at the time, and it was a community school. It was allegedly a community school, but it was actually an Orthodox school. And I started by wearing a scarf. If you look at pictures of me for a whole year, almost a year, I was wearing a scarf over my head. And pretty much I was left alone if I wanted to wear a scarf. And over time, I got sick of wearing a scarf. I was 12, and my hair was pretty, and I got tired of covering it up. And I went to school with a kippah on, and all hell broke loose. And the rabbi at the school, I'm telling you, when I was a bat mitzvah age kid, the rabbi at the school spent a year telling me why I shouldn't cover my head, why I shouldn't wear a kippah. This is an engaged kid in a school who is coming in with excitement to learn and to study and to be part of the Jewish. A year telling me, take off that kippah. It isn't. You shouldn't wear it. And that was my experience. And ultimately, I grew out of that school. I graduated out of the 8th grade, and I was moving cities, and I was moving to a new school, and I was going to go to an actual Orthodox school. And I was 14 years old, and I made the decision that I wasn't going to go into a new school as a freak, and I stopped wearing a kippah for many years. But imagine a rabbi spending a year telling a boy not to wear a kippah. I mean, just imagine that situation. It's absurd.
A girl,
What?
the rabbi telling a girl not to wear a kippah?
No, imagine a rabbi telling a boy not to wear a
Oh,
kippah.
okay.
It's
Boy,
absurd.
why is he telling a girl?
I don't know. My reaction to that rabbi approaching you not to wear a kippah was the idea that women and men shouldn't be wearing the other's clothing. Technically, we shouldn't be wearing pants because that's what men wear. I'm fully against all of that. I think if anybody wants to wear anything, my personal preference is cover your body somehow when you're out in public.
Don't go naked.
Huh?
Don't go naked. Marion?
Well, I remember when my daughter was at Temple Israel Religious School, when she was pre-bat mitzvah, she put on a talis, and one of the teachers, ripped it off her and said, "What are you doing? Do you know what you're doing?" And That was the end of that, but a similar experience, although she did not go on to be a rabbi. But it was the same thing. It was like greeted with shock that you would want to wear a tallis.
On behalf of that particular rabbi, just to say something about that particular rabbi, this was the same rabbi who privately went to my mother. And this was at a time when women were not yet rabbis, very few. It was new. It was not in the conservative movement. It was definitely not in the Orthodox movement. Sorry, you're leaving, Tyson.
I am too. I'm very sorry. This is great.
But I'm looking at my watch. It's 10 to 11.
Yeah, I want to hear your story.
We're gonna have to wrap up. In any case, this is the same rabbi that went privately to my mother and said to my mother, I think your daughter's going to become a rabbi. She has such love of Judaism. So I want, and my mother didn't tell me that until I actually became a rabbi. I did not know that happened. Just in defense, just something about that particular rabbi. People are mixed in all different ways. Something that really troubles me about the comment, I didn't grow up that way. So we shouldn't do it because I didn't grow up that way. This troubles me a lot because that's what I was told when back in the day when women first started wearing kippot, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago already, that women were first wearing kippot. The comment was, our daughters will do it. We're too old. We're too used to what we do. We have our customs already, but our daughters will do it. That's what I was told. That's what my daughter was told. My daughters were told. And that's what we're telling people now. Again, if we're not willing to change, if we're not willing to say, we want to have the kind of community where people cover their heads, or extending into the mitzvot of talis and tefillin. If we are not willing to say that these are mitzvot that are incumbent upon everybody, like Rabbi Barmash said, it's never going to change, because everybody's going to grow up that's the way it was, and that's what they're used to. Somebody has to say, like in the congregation in Schenectady, yeah, I didn't grow up this way, and yeah, it makes me a little uncomfortable, and yeah, I'm not sure what I think of this, but we have to change if we're going to raise people who are going to have a different approach and a different way of looking at it. And I think we've gone 2 generations too long with the I'm not used to it, I didn't grow up that way. There's only one way to get used to it, and that's to do it. And I think that that's a problematic argument, something that we all have to struggle with and deal with, or else nobody's going to ever be used to it. And it sounds like that's what the congregation in Schenectady is trying to confront by their current policy. Which is very interesting. So it looks like I wasn't paying attention to the time. So let's look at the end of the tshuva. Okay, so at the end, we're getting to it. Summary. Okay. Here is the summary, and I want to go, no, I want to page 9. Oh, the pieces that I wanted to look at. All right, I'm going to skip that part. Okay, the summary part. The summary that she gives is, does somebody want to read it?
You want me to read the whole thing? Hello? Rabbi?
Yeah, start at the beginning. We won't read the whole thing, but start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Read the
Go
whole
ahead.
thing.
Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Start at the beginning here in conclusion.
Okay. In conclusion, Talmudic literature describes adult females as wearing head coverings. These head coverings are essential to women's clothing, but do not have particular ritual significance.
All right, stop there just for a
Well-
second. Let's move on a little bit. To the contemporary practice. Go ahead, Barbara.
The contemporary practice of female head covering reflects the fluidity in sexual and customary situation of female head covering. On one hand, reflecting a sense of head covering as a fitting prayer garment, increasing numbers of girls and women are wearing some type of head covering in synagogue. As I remarked at the beginning of the teshuvah, some women and girls choose to wear a kippah, others a headband, and still others a hat. Indeed, with the exception of the kippah, the scarf and the hat do not serve as markers of Jewish identity and distinctiveness.
All right. Let's stop there for a second. I just want to go back one thing to here at the end. There's no necessity to read the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch as applying solely to a male audience. The recitation of Amida was required for both males and females. We can easily read both sources as requiring a head covering for anyone reciting the Amida, including Rabbi Ovadia Yosef rules that all females should cover their heads when reciting the Amida. And then we go on with what Barbara just read about fluidity in practice. Now, when I first read this, I was very, very frustrated with her conclusion about fluidity in practice. And this might say a lot about me. I was very frustrated because I can't remember other tshuvot that come up and say, let's ask the people what they're doing and how they feel about it. Why in this thing do we ask the people and say, what are they feeling about it? Why are we treating women different from people in this? Now Rabbi Spitzer gave an answer at the beginning. And the answer that he gave for that at the beginning is because it's not that the people are different, that we're talking to women and not to everybody, but rather it's that the issue is different, that we're not talking about a law, we're talking about a custom. So that's one way to answer what really troubled me about this tshuva. But another way to answer it is that she's not really talking about something that's a custom, even though technically it's a custom, because it's something that has become such normative practice that it's become kihalakha, it's become as if a law. So if that's the case, why would we treat women differently than men and ask, how do you feel about it? How do you want to do it? It's something that really troubles me about the way that it's written. Then I went back and read it again. And when I went back and read it again, I realized that I had overblown my original reaction just a little bit. And I'll show you why. Here is her final tshuva. So here's the part that really bothers me. Rather than making fiat declarations, we encourage our communities to listen to the voices of girls and women, both those that already do engage in practices of head covering and those that do not. Can you imagine saying, let's ask people who keep kosher and people who don't keep kosher what we think the rules of kashrut in the synagogue should be? Or should we ask people who keep Shabbos and people who don't keep Shabbos what the rules of keeping Shabbos in the synagogue should be? It's just a very strange approach, and it troubles me a lot. But her answer is a little less troubling once you read it carefully. Because women and girls' customary practice is increasingly moving in the direction of head covering in shul, and because the textual tradition leans towards requiring women's head covering, we advocate the following. Number one, women and girls should cover their heads when reading from the Torah and when receiving an aliyah. That's pretty obligatory. Cover your head when you read from the Torah and receive an aliyah. In deference to kavod hatzibur, honor of the community, women and girls should cover their heads when acting as prayer leader. And that goes back to the question of who is the normative, and the normative is what is the practice done when you lead? You cover your heads. When praying shacharit, mincha, mariv as an individual, women and girls should cover their heads at least when reciting the Amidah, and ideally during the entire prayer service. Cover your head when davening is what this says. Then we have head covering at other times is a matter of personal piety, and a woman or girl may cover her hair or her head with a garment of her choice. I don't know why it says hair here. That's a mistake. Cover her head with a garment of her choice. That garment need not publicly identify her as a Jew. This one is the one that I wonder about, and I wonder if the whole reaction to the whole tshuva might have been different if she had concluded here, head coverings at another time is a matter of personal piety, and people of all genders may cover their heads with garments of their choices, including hats and scarves and yarmulkes and doilies and dunce caps. I don't know.
Yes.
Whatever you want. I
Dunce
wonder if that, I shouldn't have said dunce caps. I didn't mean that.
Dunce-
But whatever, what it means is, I wonder if my reaction and if our reaction to the entire tshuva would have been different if the conclusion had been about everybody and not just about men and not just about women and girls having should cover whenever they want. What do you think?
I think she couldn't end in the more inclusive way that you were hoping for, because it didn't answer the question. Because she asked the question at the top, the question was so limiting. Should women and girls wear a head covering during prayer? If so, when and where? Even like head covering, even point number 4 already makes a ruling that doesn't answer the question. 1, 2, and 3 answer her question, but 4 is sort of going out on a limb anyway. So if she was going to put 4 into the tshuva, she should have phrased the question differently. And I completely agree with you that I would have liked this tshuva to end about the way in which this practice is meaningful for everybody, the way in which this practice could be meaningful for people of all genders, that somebody like me who identifies as a man should also have to wonder, why is this practice meaningful to me? And in what way is it a matter of personal piety? And in what way does it identify me as a Jew? And how does that affect the way that I respond in the world? So I completely am with you on the desire for this tshuva to actually be a little bit more broad in its approach. And because it was so narrow at the beginning, I actually think that even point number 4, as it currently is already a stretch, but she couldn't have stretched it anymore.
Right, so maybe she should have left number 4 off altogether. Maybe she should have ended with 3 because her question anyway was about prayer. If you go back to the top and ask what the question wasn't what should they do about other times. The question was about prayer. So she could have ended at 3 and I would have had a lot less trouble with this tshuva. And would have felt a whole lot less uncomfortable about the tshuva. And we promised we'd end at 11 and it's 11. So I want to make a quick conclusion, and then Rabbi Spitzer wants to make a conclusion also.
Can I say one thing so fast, Rabbi? May I?
Go ahead.
Rabbis, for me, I believe it's a personal choice, because if you start making women wear a yarmulke, then they're going to want women to wear talit. That's next.
No, it's
And
the other way around.
you think it's the other way around?
Yeah.
Women are already obligated in
Someone
talit.
say,
Pardon?
Women are already obligated in talit. You're already obligated to wear a talit. It doesn't go the other way. Like, you should be wearing a talis.
I should.
Yeah.
All right, we're not going to end this by going there. We're not going to end this by
Sorry.
going there.
Sorry.
Rabbi Barmash definitely said that in her 2014 tshuva, but we're not going to end this by going there. Marion, is that a hand or not a hand?
I'm sorry. I have to keep my hands.
Okay, it's okay. You can wave your hands around. I don't want to miss you if you want to say something.
Thank you.
So I very much appreciate our opportunity to explore this, and I don't think we finished. I think that there's more to say. I found this tshuva frustrating. I found the sources very exciting, and I found the conclusion of the tshuva frustrating, and I think that if she had ended with number 3, I would have found it a whole lot less frustrating, because she would have answered the question that she asked. I think that our willingness to explore and to ask, what does this mean to us, is really important. I thought somebody's comment at the very beginning that we never got back to, somebody's comment that it sounds really reform if all we ask is, what does it mean to you? And not, what do we have to do? Is something that we never got back to, but I don't think we should let that slip entirely. I think that's something we should grapple with. The difference between what does it mean to each person individually, and what are our communal standards of behavior that we say, this is how we behave in our spaces. And I think that's something that we should not lose our thread on that. And as a person who wears, as a woman who wears a yarmulke on the street all the time, and I wear my yarmulke wherever I go, into churches, into ultra-Orthodox areas, into Israel, into everywhere. I have had every experience that you can think of, with different kinds of reactions, and I'll be happy to share more about that at some point. People say all kinds of things to me, and I don't always like every individual interaction, but I do like the fact that I have those interactions. And I can share more about what that's like. And what we said at the beginning about God being all around really reminds me all the time that I am who I am, and I'm representing God and the Jewish people in my behavior. And sometimes it brings me up short, and sometimes I fall short. And I do things that afterwards I say, wow, I shouldn't have said that wearing a kippah. And most of the time it stops me, but when it doesn't, it's painful. And the idea of the importance of keeping our heads covered as we are prayer leaders, and as we are on the bima, and as we are in shul, and how that extends out. Let us continue to grapple and to think about that as we end our session, whether we are men or women or other, and continue to grapple with that and to think about that, and to ask ourselves, what does that mean? And Rabbi Spitzer, you can end too.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming to this program, and for reading the tshuva, and for engaging with the topic. I hope that it makes you think differently about your practice, and that and it encourages you to explore what the meaning of this custom would be for you. If you choose to experiment with a new practice, okay? If you choose to experiment with a new practice, I encourage you to, in advance, set an amount of time that you're going to experiment it for, and commit to that whole period of time. Something like, for the next 4 months, every time I go to shul, I'm going to try this, okay? Because doing it once or twice isn't enough. You have to really give yourself an amount of time to explore what it means to you. Then I think you should take some time where you don't do it, okay? And only after having done it for a set amount of time, 4 months or 6 months, and then not doing it for a month or 2 months. I don't like, if it's been your practice not to wear kippah, I don't think you have to do it for a lot of time afterward, but I think you should stop and see how it makes you feel to stop. Like, do you feel, oh, I'm underdressed in this moment because I'm no longer wearing my, right? Like, what emotional reaction do you have to that? So I think you should, if you want to try to experiment with a new practice, you have to give yourself a real amount of time. Just like if you were going to start lighting candles on Friday night for the first time in your life, right? You can't just light candles one Friday night and be like, oh, bringing in Shabbos this way didn't mean anything to me, so I'm not going to do it again, right? Now, you got to give yourself a set amount of time, right? From Pesach to Sukkot, right? An amount of time that's like a significant chunk. All right, so that's my advice about experimentation. And I did want to say there were a couple of questions that came up in the chat that we didn't get to discussing. And I do want to encourage people of both congregations to continue to engage with those questions with your rabbi. They were valuable questions. And the last thing that I want to say is this conversation continues internationally, globally, at noon today, and then again at 5 p.m. today, where the author of this teshuvah, Rabbi Jane Kanarek, has prepared an hour-long discussion of the teshuvah that has been recorded, and it's going to be played twice today. So if you have a chance, either at noon or at 5, I encourage you to go to the link that we sent out and to engage with this topic from Rabbi Jane Kanarek herself, because I think that hearing about the tshuva from her point of view is very valuable, and she did come to it with a certain amount of ambivalence about this practice, and I think that makes her an interesting spokesperson for having grappled with all of these texts. So again, I want to thank everybody for engaging. And I hope to continue discovering how the practice of head covering and all of our religious practices are meaningful to us as we take them on.
Yasher koach to
Thank you,
Rabbi.
thank you.
Yes, no,
Very
thank you
inspiring.
both.
Thank
Very
you.
inspiring. Thank you both.